What do you get when you mix venture capital, Instagram, and the Los Angeles Lakers? The fascinating journey of Joshua Kushner. I'm Leah, and I'm excited to dig into this one today.
I'm Garrett, totally ready to dive in and, piece together how all these worlds connect.
This is Laid Back Learning with Leah and Garrett.
Joshua Kushner, from venture capital to sports ownership.
Quick story. I remember seeing an Oscar Health ad a while back and thinking this feels like someone tried to make health insurance feel like an app you actually want to use. Clean colors, plain language, fewer hoops. It stood out because health insurance usually feels like forms on forms. Oscar pitched something more user-friendly, which made me curious about who was behind it and how they were trying to change a really complicated space.
All right, let's set the scene. Venture capital is basically money invested into young or fast-growing companies in exchange for ownership, called equity. The goal is to find a few big winners that can pay for all the misses. Joshua Kushner is one of the investors in that world. In 2009, he founded Thrive Capital, which started with a focus on media and internet companies. Think consumer apps, platforms, and increasingly, artificial intelligence. Over time, Thrive scaled from relatively small early funds to very large ones. By 2024, it closed a ninth fund at $5 billion. That kind of growth usually signals that the firm's earlier bets worked well enough that big institutions wanted a larger allocation.
And then there's Oscar Health. In 2012, Joshua co-founded Oscar, a health insurer that tried to make the experience simpler and more digital first. Insurers operate in a highly regulated, low-margin world, meaning there is not a lot of wiggle room on costs or pricing. So bringing tech to the front end, like easier doctor searches or telemedicine, was the pitch. By 2021, Oscar went public. That's an IPO, or initial public offering, where a company sells shares on a stock exchange for the first time. It was a big moment for the operator side of Joshua's career, not just the investor side.
Let's rewind to the early days. Before Thrive, he was at Harvard and had a couple of experiments that honestly foreshadowed his later interests. He co-founded Vastu around 2007, a social network and gaming platform aimed at Latin America. The thesis was simple to say, but hard to do. Internet adoption was accelerating fast in non-English regions, so there might be room to build local-first networks outside the shadow of U.S. platforms. He also started Unithrive in 2009, an interest-free microloan site where alumni could lend small amounts to students to help cover short-term needs, with repayment expected after graduation. That captured his community-building streak. When Thrive launched in 2009, one of its early calling cards was Instagram. He reportedly became the second-largest investor in Instagram's Series B. Quick definition. A Series B is a later funding round for companies that have early traction and are trying to scale. When Facebook acquired Instagram, Thrive's stake reportedly doubled quickly, a swift, concentrated win that can define a firm's reputation and signal, hey, we can spot consumer lightning in a bottle.
Then, Oscar Health enters. It's interesting because Joshua wasn't just writing checks. He was also co-founding and serving as vice chairman. That is a hybrid operator-investor model, meaning he allocates capital, but also helps run things. Oscar targeted the user experience gap in a complicated system: clearer pricing, digital tools, accessible care navigation. But even with a sleek product, insurance is insurance. The math is tough. You have claims costs, what's called the medical loss ratio, which is basically the share of premiums that go out to pay for care. If that's too high, profits are hard to find. So even with a strong story, there were real headwinds ahead.
As Thrive built its track record, the funds kept getting bigger. Thrive 2 raised $40 million in 2011, then $150 million in 2012, $400 million in 2014, $700 million in 2016, and crossed $1 billion in 2018. By 2021, the firm raised a $2 billion fund, then $3 billion in 2022, and again $5 billion in 2024. Along the way, heavyweight investors got involved with the management company itself. In 2021, Bloomberg reported Goldman Sachs put a price tag of about $3.6 billion on Thrive, and Joshua sold a 3.3% stake to a group that included Bob Iger and Henry Kravis, valuing the firm at about $5.3 billion. For context, Bob Iger is the longtime Disney chief executive known for major acquisitions like Pixar and Marvel, and Henry Kravis co-founded KKR, a leading private equity firm. Those relationships matter because they bridge media, tech, and big finance.
On the Oscar side, the 2021 IPO was a milestone. At the listing, Thrive's stake was valued at about $1.21 billion. But here's where reality hits the narrative. In Oscar's first quarter as a public company, it reported an $87 million loss. That doesn't mean the idea failed. It shows how hard the economics are when you are paying out most of your premiums to cover care and still trying to acquire customers and build tech. It also shows the limits of disruption in a sector where regulation and margins set the rules of the game. You can make the front door easier to walk through, but the back office math still has to work. And then there's the real estate piece that brought controversy. Joshua and his brother Jared each own 50% of JK2, also known as Westminster Management, a landlord with properties around Baltimore. In April 2021, a Maryland judge ruled there were widespread and numerous violations of consumer protection laws. That includes things like collecting debts without the right licenses or charging improper fees. Consumer protection laws are rules designed to keep businesses from misleading or unfair practices. It's a sharp contrast with the tech-forward, user-friendly image, and it drew even more attention because investigative reporting and a Netflix documentary episode had already spotlighted tenant experiences.
All right, let's roll on to the sports turn. In 2019, Joshua bought a 2.5% minority stake in the Memphis Grizzlies. Minority stake just means you own less than half and you don't control the organization. In 2024, he sold that Grizzlies position and purchased a small stake in the Miami Heat. Then came a major leap. In August 2026, it was reported that Joshua Kushner and Bob Iger purchased the Los Angeles Lakers for $12.5 billion. The report said the deal was with Mark Walter, a prominent sports owner and investor, and that they praised the Buss family's leadership while committing long-term to Los Angeles. If finalized as described, that would be one of the highest valuations for a sports franchise and would move Joshua from minority owner to co-steward of a flagship team.
What makes that pivot even more interesting is the network effect. Remember, he had already brought in Bob Iger and Henry Kravis as investors in Thrive, so when you later see a reported Lakers deal with Iger, it tracks. Those relationships were already in place. At the same time, Joshua leaned further into media and culture. He joined the board of A24 Films in 2024, the independent studio known for award-winning and culturally buzzy movies. And with his wife, Carly Kloss, they launched Bedford Media, which plans to revive Life magazine with a print return in early 2025 in partnership with Dotdash Meredith. Reviving Life is a bold bet on a legacy brand that still has emotional weight.
One more thread. Thrive's investment in OpenAI was cited by Fortune when it named Joshua to its 2024 list of the 100 most powerful people in business. OpenAI, for quick context, is a leading artificial intelligence research and product company focused on large-scale models. That nod shows how Thrive's thesis moved from social platforms toward big platform technologies like AI, where software, data, and distribution tend to compound over time.
Okay, let's move on to a thorny, still unanswered piece. During the period from October 2023 into spring 2024, The Washington Post reported that a WhatsApp group of U.S. business leaders discussed messaging in support of Israel after the October 7th attack by Hamas and urged police action at Columbia University's Gaza Solidarity encampment. The reporting placed Joshua in that chat. A spokesperson for him said he did not participate. So, we're left with conflicting accounts and no direct communications from him confirming participation.
Yeah, and here's where it gets tricky. Elite coordination is not new. Influential people often talk, compare notes, and shape how issues are framed. The bigger question to me is transparency and influence. If people with outsized platforms are trying to affect public narratives or university decisions, it matters whether they are in the room and what they're asking for. With Joshua, the denial adds a layer. If he wasn't participating, then the story is more about how quickly a name can get attached to a private conversation and what that does to reputation.
I see that, and I'd add this. In a career that spans healthcare, tech, media, and now reported Major League sports ownership, the spotlight is bright and constant. So even perceived involvement becomes part of the public file. It raises questions about how leaders engage with contentious events and what responsibility they carry when their networks move in lockstep. I don't think we get a neat resolution here, but the scrutiny itself has consequences.
Speaking of scrutiny in pop culture, JK2's practices were featured in Netflix's Dirty Money episode Slumlord Millionaire, which amplified prior investigative work by ProPublica. That episode put a human face on tenant stories and contrasted sharply with the polished tech narrative. On the other end of the spectrum, you have Joshua joining A24's board and helping bring Life magazine back, which shows how he's leaning into spaces where storytelling and brand legacy carry serious weight.
All right, on to a counterfactual that's been on my mind. What if Vastu, that early social gaming and networking play aimed at Latin America, had not run into the legal and competitive headwinds it did? In 2013, it laid off a majority of employees after a competitor's copyright lawsuit accused it of copying games. Those are allegations from the competitor rather than court-established facts in what we have here, but the company clearly retrenched. If Vastu had dominated, would Joshua have leaned even harder into international consumer platforms? Maybe Thrive would have focused more on non-English markets, building local champions, and less on US-centric bets.
I'm down for that thought experiment. If Vastu had been a breakout, the operator's success could have nudged Thrive's thesis toward global, language-specific social fabrics. You might see more investments in payments and logistics layers that power those networks, plus content moderation and trust systems tuned for each region. And maybe Oscar Health never happens in the same way because his operator energy is tied up abroad. Or, alternative path, the Vastu win gives him more confidence and capital earlier, which accelerates Thrive's ability to lead rounds in frontier tech while still running an international consumer portfolio. That's a pretty different legacy tree.
Real talk. The through line I still see is thesis-driven investing. Whether it's Instagram, OpenAI, or a hypothetical Vastu empire, the pattern is backing platforms where network effects and data make each new user more valuable than the last. So even in the counter world, I think we'd still find Thrive at those inflection points, just with a more global tilt and maybe different operator scars and wins shaping the playbook.
Stay curious and keep following the threads that connect ideas across worlds, tech, health, media, and even the hardwood.
And keep exploring new angles. The big picture gets clearer with each one. That's the heartbeat of it.